football and specifically the defense, because we focus on the offense specifically in the first segment of the show, that we're not going to shy away from the defense, which they've had the struggles of their own at times. And really, when it comes to the defense, again, a similar story to the offense when it comes to that inconsistency, but in particular for the defense, it's just being unable to close games, specifically when they get put in positions to being able to close out games. I mentioned the 4th and 20. There's a whole bunch of instances I believe they've had. It's come down to the final. They've been thrown straight into the fire because 4 out of the 5 games have come down to the final possession. They were able to make a stop against UTSA and Rice, not so much against Texas Tech and this past week against Tulane. And here's what defensive coordinator Doug Belk had to say just in terms of those struggles closing out games and how they can get better and improve.
A lot of new faces, and a lot of development, a lot of coaching. Overall, I'm proud of the way that we've competed, and I'm proud of the way that we've approached the game. But overall, when you're in position to win the game, if you're a real competitor, and you want to take the next step into being a championship level team, you can't really lose the games that we've lost, and we got to do a better job of finishing. That's really the message that we have sent over the last couple of weeks. And when you look at the tape, you can play good football for a lot of the game, but if you don't do things right and do things detailed and play with a high sense of urgency at the end of the game, then you're going to lose. And we've had several, plays in the game that have directly affected the game. And we've had a chance to win on defense no matter, the circumstance or how we played early. We haven't finished. So, excited about the physicality, excited about the way that we've been able to get it, affect the quarterback and some of the plays we've been able to make in the back end. But, ultimately the game is about winning and losing at the end of the day. Fundamentals, blocking, tackling.
Outside of the Kansas game, Doug, the 4 others have had different types of situations at the end or, something, not too different, but then they've all had their situations there. Have you put a finger on, is it just not making a play? Is it, not being in a position? I mean, what has been the culprit there at the end? I was kind of about to get to that before you cut me off, but sorry.
At the end of the day, it comes down to understanding situational football, and there's a combination of, at the end of the game, heightened sense of urgency to not play hero ball, play with great technique, play with great discipline. And, whether it was a lack of understanding or whether I haven't coached them well enough or guys is simply not, making the plays in critical situations. At the end of the day, that's my job to get those guys in position to make those plays. So I don't think it's just one thing. I mean, the other coaches have done a great job of game planning against us. Other players have made plays, and we've made plays as well. So it's just, understanding that situation, and you got to be able to make those plays in that time of the game, and they got to be in the right call from me and our staff to really be able to execute those plays. So it's a combination of a lot of different things, and ultimately in a couple of the games, we just didn't get it done. It's that simple.
So you heard it there from defensive coordinator Doug Belk. A lot of interesting stuff, and it's kind of a good thing right there where he mentioned situational football, and I know that's something that you asked asked Elias Bell about that, and really he talked about execution and communication, and tackling. Those were the 3 factors that he said the team has focused on in practice, specifically this week as it's leading up to Memphis.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I've been saying a lot throughout this entire season in different podcasts. Throughout the season in different episodes and let's raise schools, because I mean, like that 4th and 20 something play, that's a situational football where you understand it's only so much that the offense can do and so much that you want to stop it during that on that situation. And it's happened on numerous of times. I remember, I think last game they gave up a 3rd and 20 something in which Coach Belk, they put the camera on him and he was visibly upset. And because it's just things like that in situational football, is certain things that you don't want to give up and you want to be mindful of and you want to pay attention of. And like you just said, whether it's him maybe not coaching them well enough or them not being attentive and being understanding what they should do in their assignment and how to execute it. It's just different variables in which I'm sure that they can fix, and it can be fixed. And Elias Bell, he also mentioned, in just fundamentals, tackling, simple as that.
Yeah, and specifically focusing on what Bell said, and Dayon, you mentioned it again. Just they've been in several positions, and specifically going back to that 4th and 20, like you mentioned, that was a busted coverage. And I can't remember. Belk's the one that kind of followed up on it, where the defensive backs, they were playing too far out. They were kind of guarding the end zone and it was in the overtime scenario. They had no one guarding the sticks, and it allowed Texas Tech to, on a dump off, being able to literally drop it off and run for essentially the first down. It was 4th and 20, and they got exactly 21 yards. Stuff like that it's really the difference between again, kind of what's been the theme of this whole episode, what Hogerson said, between where they are right now at 2-3 and 4-1. And it's a lot of it obviously has to do with more players being put in situations where maybe they weren't necessarily comfortable in a season ago, especially when it comes to the different positions on the defense. We know the story by now with Marcus Jones, Demarion Williams, even with Logan Hall up front, where they were just in terms of the veterans and the high caliber players that they had there. Now entering this season, a couple of players have had to take on new roles, and it is an adjustment period. But I think it from a player's perspective, something we've mentioned in previous shows and episodes, I feel like if you were a player on the defense, that's what you want to hear, not only from your defensive coordinator, but he takes responsibility. But at the end of the day, he mentioned it. It's not on that clip, but during his availability, he said, even though we did good stuff during the beginning of the game, what matters is at the end. If we can't finish, it doesn't necessarily matter what you were able to do in the past. And at the end of the day, only wins and losses are what matters. And not necessarily quoting him word by word, but paraphrasing a little bit, he said, if you want to be a championship level team, you got to figure out ways to seal the deal, to finish the deal and close out those teams. And that's something that Houston has really struggled in this season.
And that's big facts right there. If you want to be a championship level team, you don't beat yourself. You don't beat yourselves. You don't allow plays like that to happen in situations like that. You look at the teams in that upper echelon, like Alabama's and Georgia's and Clemson's and all the other teams of the world. They don't give up plays like that. And so, I mean, he's 100% right. We know his resume. We know where he's been. He's been with Alabama. He's been with Coach Saban. He's seen what championship level teams, how they are, how they work, how they prepare, how they execute. And so he knows what it takes. And I'm sure the players are 100% bought in, listening to his words. They just have to do it. Coaches coach, players play. And so coaches can only take so much of the blame. Players have to go out and execute.
For sure. And then overall, across what you've seen from the defense, because it hasn't all been negative, and it's something that Doug Belk said, where they've had good, they've had some bad, and they've had some ugly, and really the key for Houston, Belk said, was being able to eliminate that ugly part. But he said he's been excited what he's seen from the defense in terms of physicality, how they've been able to affect the quarterback at times, some plays made from the defensive backfield. By the way, an injury update now during his availability, Doug Belk said that the Javarius Owens and Art Green were still day-to-day during his radio show later in the day. So in the evening, Dana Holgorsen said they should be good to go to play against Memphis. So that's obviously going to be a big boost to the backfield for Houston if those two can go after they weren't able to go against Tulane. Obviously, Donovan Mutin did play, and he said he was good after the postgame, so he should be good to go against Memphis as well. But that's been something that they've had to deal with too, and even again, going back a few weeks when Holgorsen said, specifically in that defensive backfield, trying to be able to get a lot more depth or develop the depth behind guys like Green, guys like Alex Hogan, and being able to get more players to plug in and play like they were last year, because that's probably that's a detail that it kind of gets glossed over, where, yeah, they had Marcus Jones and Demarius Owens, but then they also had guys like Art Green, they had guys like Alex Hogan, they had Javarius Owens cycling in and being able to make plays as well when those players were out. And that's really been a factor for Houston that they haven't had, a luxury they haven't had this season.
Yeah, you're right. And having that depth, especially when you play the amount of plays that they have, the overtimes and how much they've been on the field, you want to have the luxury of taking drives off and putting in players and not having a level drop off as far as talent or talent drop off when they get on the field, and it allowed them to execute and play to the same level of the starters. And so that's definitely something that hasn't been into Houston's benefit this season. And so, yeah, I mean, you got to continue to develop. But that's something Coach Holgerson has been asked about. He's talked about the talent level on this team in reference specifically to Big 12 and Big 12 talent and championship level. In his words, he said they have a ways to go to get there. And what that says to the players that he's brought in over this year, and which over recently, since all the players that he have are his players. And so those players are being considered when he says that, I should say. And so, I mean, you got to develop, in which they've been shown that they can develop. We've talked about that. Let's raise Cougars, the ability to develop players, and so just have to continue to do so.
Yeah, and that's something that Hogerson's doubled down a few times since they initially said it. But any final thoughts just over on the defense, and as we look ahead to Memphis, because they are going to have a really good challenge when it comes to the Tigers. It doesn't get any easy for Houston, and something Hogerson said during his press conference on Monday was, we've made it 4 games and might as well make it 5 games that are going to come down to the wire, just in terms of a Memphis team that coming in hot. They are 4-1. They have won the first 2 games when it comes to conference play, and really they have a lot of weapons. And interestingly enough, when it comes to their quarterback and Seth Hannigan, who Doug Belk said he's similar to when they were preparing to face off against Michael Pratt last week against Tulane. They didn't get to see him, but Seth Hannigan, Belk had similar things to say about him, just in terms of how he's in command of the Tigers offense. He rarely makes mistakes, especially when it comes to passing. He's thrown 9 touchdowns. He's only had 1 interception. But the thing that's going to be crucial for Houston is how much damage he can also do with his legs, because he's rushed for over 150 yards, and he's actually scored a couple of touchdowns for the Tigers as well. And their running back, they have a lot of weapons that can hurt Houston on the ground game, and that's something that they struggled with against Kansas, being able to stop their rushing attack, because they have guys like Brandon Thomas that really have done. They have 4 players that have rushed for over 150 yards, and one that's rushed for over 200, and 2 others that are real close to that 200 rushing yard mark.
Yeah, and Memphis has been a team who's been able to develop running backs and getting into the next level. The Tony Pollards of the world, Kenneth Gainwell, Gibson that's at Washington for the Redskins. And so they've been able to develop running backs. Henderson that plays for the Rams. That's 4 running backs, all came from Memphis. And so they're prone to developing running backs. And there's going to be another quarterback. I feel like every quarterback that Houston has faced this season, maybe with the exception of Bryce, has been dual threat quarterbacks. And so that's another element they should be used to defending right now, in which they have to really hone in on their keys and really, like Elias Bell said, make tackles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when it comes to the receiving target, another player that Doug Belk shouted out and kind of spotlighted, you're not necessarily, when you think of top receiving target, you don't usually expect it to be the tight end. That's the case for Memphis and tight end Caden Prigscorn, who he's caught 18 passes. He has 178 receiving yards, but he's one of the top receiving. He's one of the top guys in the nation when it comes to receiving touchdowns. He's had 5 overall for the season for the Tigers at a tight end position. That's going to be something that, again, when I think of that, when their tight end is so involved in the passing game, that gives Memphis a lot of flexibility to be able to try a lot of different things, especially when they have such a strong rushing attack, to being able to incorporate the tight ends as well in that passing game. That's something that Houston's going to have to look for, and something, again, going back to Kansas and a couple of other times with various opponents across the season, it's something that's given them problems. The mobile quarterbacks have given them problems with Donovan Smith, Frank Harris. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can learn from those past experiences. And if we heard Elias Bell say they're going to be looking to being able to contain him and force him to beat him with his arm, which is what the Cougars are going to be aiming for.
Yep, try to make Memphis one-dimensional, stifle that run game, and put them in obvious passing down situations so they can get after the quarterback. And it's easier said than done, but I think they can do so. Like I mentioned at the start of the show, the last game and often throughout the season, defense has played well enough to win games. They just have to finish and not allow allow other teams to capitalize in situations that favor the defense. And so I trust in Doug Belk 100%. I trust that he can still get this defense to limit some of those mistakes and be the driving force of the team. And just look, if they've been able to close out the games with the offense playing how they have the entire game, you can look back and say this defense has carried Houston throughout this entire season. And so I know they are what their record says they are, and it's win how they went. But just take away those drives, and you look at it in totality, the defense has outperformed the offense. And so they just got to turn it around, put it together one game at a time, and see how it turns out.
They've certainly been able to keep them in games outside of that Kansas game where they really struggled. But that's really the story of the season for Houston overall. And it's a big game on Friday, again, like we mentioned, not only in terms of standings, but probably for the Houston players themselves to be able to get a win heading into the bye week. And again, like I mentioned, be at 3-3. That's not where they wanted to start the season. But 1-1 in conference, 3-3 overall in the season. They get a chance to adjust and still have a lot to play for once they get out of the bye. I feel if they lose that game to Memphis, it'll be a tougher road, obviously, of course, but just in terms of the mindset, they've been in 4 games that have really been heartbreakers the way it's ended for them. So a much-needed win, and overall, there's going to be a lot of eyeballs just to see how they respond. They come out again, like we mentioned, they have been in all those games. So they come out, show fight. That's going to go a long way to show that they are still, involved, still active, still belief among the team, which is probably the most important thing for the players right now.
Yeah, come out and compete. Try to stack these wins up, close the season out strong, and you never know what's going to happen throughout the rest of the conference and how the chips may fall. So all you can control is what you can control and try to stack these wins.
For sure, and that's going to do it for today's episode. So we'd like to remind you guys again, if you haven't done so already, or if you're listening in our audio-only platforms, we appreciate you guys checking us out on Spotify, Apple Podcast, anywhere else where you may be listening. There's Amazon. I'm not going to list off all the different audio platforms that we have, but we also encourage you to check us out on YouTube, where the same way we see it, you see it on your screen wherever you're listening to Pawd Slama Jama on YouTube, because it's not only the podcast that we show on our channel, but we have daily content, honestly, when it comes to Houston Cougars football, men's basketball, women's basketball. It's almost basketball season. I mentioned October 7th, this upcoming Friday, there's going to be the launch of Lincoln Cougs at TDSU Stadium. It's also going to mark exactly 1 month until both men's basketball and women's basketball tip off their seasons, which both play November 7th. So we're getting closer and closer to the basketball season. And that's going to do it for today's episode. Also, be sure to follow us. We're on Instagram and TikTok at Let's Rage Cougs, and on Twitter, like you see it on the screen, Pawd Slama Jama down. I'll toss it over to you for the final word, sir.
Hey, man, we can't end an episode without saying Let's Go Cougs, but also thank you all for support. Make sure you like and subscribe, whatever platform you listen on. We greatly appreciate it.